Honors 1300. The title of the course is Reading Los Angeles, Community and Structure. The topic of the course is basically a study of civic engagement in Los Angeles. And I teach it, different professors teach it differently. I teach it through the lens of performance. So historically, what were some key performances, how these performances help both reflect and create a sense of identity and identification. So for example, we looked at Anna Deavere Smith's Twilight Los Angeles and the 1990s. We're going to be looking at Zoot Suit and the 1960s and 70s. We looked at a powerful documentary called Game Girls, was just produced a couple of years ago, about a queer couple in downtown Los Angeles who were homeless and struggling in and out of prison and in and out of shelters, and at the same time attending drama therapy workshops and doing creative artwork. And so we had, in fact, one of the protagonists from that documentary that came and spoke to the class. And the students have been both writing reflections on a weekly basis and also doing performances as well, so creating their own performances as well. So in fact, this weekend, I had a really wonderful pleasure of watching everyone's incredible performances, and happy to see how people took it in very different directions and created some wonderful work. Today we have a special guest, which we have actually visited earlier this semester, Brianna Mims. Brianna is the director, artistic director, the creator of the Letters from the Etui project, which I think we all looked at and visited at the beginning of the semester. And so it's great to have you here, Mims. Just a brief bio about Mims. Mims is a graduate of University of Southern California. She is an artist, an abolitionist, and a facilitator, originally from Jacksonville, Florida, and based in Los Angeles. She has trained and performed in many different dance forms over several years. Her work spans across the disciplines of fashion, dance, advocacy, facilitation, curation, and direction, and is rooted in self and cultural explorations, healing and shifting culture alongside policy to create sustainable change. So Mims graduated from USC, where she studied dance and NGOs and social change. So she writes in her bio that she experiences the body as a site of liberation and uses that information as a guide for organizing, facilitation, and all of the art that she creates. And so we're very fortunate to have you speak, Mims, and present today precisely on that topic. I was fortunate to hear Mims yesterday in our Comms 4460 class, so this would be a doubly privileged to be able to hear you again today as well.
Thanks for sharing with me, y'all. Like Dr. Fari said, my name is Mims. I'm an artist, an abolitionist, and a facilitator. I am currently in Jacksonville, Florida on Timucua land, and I am based out of Los Angeles, California. I work for Californians United for a Responsible Budget, and I am wearing a Black sweater that says, "Together we demand the freedom to fly." I am a Black person with medium brown skin, and I'm wearing a gray scarf. I think that's it. Oh, and I use she, her pronouns. So let me just go back. I titled this, "How Can Art Further the Mission of Abolition?" And so that's what we will kind of be digging into today, some of my artwork. But first, I'm going to lay a framework of what abolition and transformative justice is, so you all understand what the work is about. So as mentioned in my bio, I have trained in dance the majority of my life. And I feel like my movement practice is sort of this baseline, this guide, and this teacher. And so I wanted to share this meditation that I wrote with you all, and then I can give you some more concrete examples of just contextualizing this sort of information in a practical sense. So I'll read it to you all. It says, the body as a site of liberation, the cultural knowledge in the body as a site of liberation, the ancestral memory in the body as a site of liberation, the archived memories in the body as a site of liberation, the joy in the body as a site of liberation, the sensations in the body as a guide for healing and direction, the grief in the body as a site for healing, the rhythms and vibrations in the body as a site for spiritual and ancestral connection. Resting the body creates a portal for dreaming, the freedom in the body as a compass. Listen with your whole body. So you can also find this on my website. And I think a lot from just my sort of dance training has shaped this sort of knowledge and understanding I have of the body, but also just some people in movement space that I really admire and look up to shape my framework have really thought about the body a lot as a means of it being a site for liberation, and delving a lot into somatics as well. So I wanted to share some things from Adrienne Maree Brown and Prentice Hemphill that kind of speak to this as well. And so I'm paraphrasing these words because it's from some webinars that I heard them speak on. But Adrienne Maree Brown said, the body is the technology of liberation. It knows how to find freedom no matter what our sort of external circumstances are. And this feeling is a guide. And Prentice Hemphill, speaking directly about folks in movement space, saying, it's important for us to know what freedom feels like in our bodies. It teaches us which way to go. Again, connecting back to that feeling and really being able to listen and tune in to our bodies. And also something that's not mentioned in here is also just simply tending to the body, like creating some sort of ritual, knowing what your body needs, what places need things more than other, and creating some sort of ritual around it. Taking care of our bodies feels like important information and work for us to do, because this abolition work is also care work, and it starts with ourselves. And I wanted to just share a little bit about how we can learn information from our body. I think there's a lot of different ways, but personally, my favorite thing that I've learned from my body, my favorite lesson, is this practice of surrendering and honoring the unknowing, the space of the unknowing. In dance, we have this thing called improvisation, like just about every other performance art. And in that space of movement, there's a time in which you have to surrender to kind of find that magic, that new sort of exploration, that moment that feels like really magical and divine. That's like the goodness, the space that I'm always like chasing after, my favorite part of dance. But within surrendering to that space, there's a whole bunch of knowledge from past experience and training and doing it before, of how you approach and kind of fall into that space, and even what you're doing in that space unconsciously is informed by your past sort of knowledge and experiences. And I feel like this practice of honoring and surrendering to the unknowing is something that I take into all of the work that I do. I feel a great sense of pleasure in that space, and so much magic happens that I'm always like, I'm ready for that place. And so I have to be open to that. And what was interesting of how it just made this random connection. I was reading We Do This Till We Free Us by Miriam Kalba. She is also one of our abolitionist North Stars. This book just recently came out, so I suggest folks picking it up. It's on abolitionist organizing and transformative justice. But she said something that really resonated with me as it relates to this idea of this space of the unknowing as it relates to abolition. She said people practicing an abolitionist work, they have to be given space to breathe and stumble. They have to be given time to develop and reveal what they can do. There are no soloists after all. This is group improvisation. For Miriam, group improvisation means working together, learning together, and failing together by building a million different little experiments, just building and trying and taking risks and understanding we're going to have a ton of failure. While Miriam encourages experimentation and being open to failure, she remains steadfast that abolitionist politics require certain principles, such as seeking accountability for harm and violence without involving or expanding the prison industrial complex. Miriam also notes that practicing abolition demands healthy ego checks in terms of not confusing our feelings for policy or politics. So the framing of it being an improvisation is the part that resonated with me the most. This idea that in order to develop these sort of new responses to harm and all of this new way of being amongst each other, which abolition calls for, we have to lean a little bit into that space of the unknowing and a little bit of uncertainty. So I've been sitting with that. And so that is, I just wanted to share that with you all because that sort of thought was provoked from my movement practice and applied in my personal life, but also in my abolition work. So I have some initial reflection questions for you all. We can take about 5 minutes, but the questions are: what makes you feel safe? What makes someone deserving of imprisonment? And what work does prisons and policing actually do? And that quote, that last question was pulled from the same book by Miriam Kaba. So take a few minutes. You can put your answers in the chat. You can keep them to yourself. You can feel free to unmute yourself in a few minutes and share aloud. It's up to you. Feel free to also take these questions home and further reflect. So give yourself some time.
I can answer the what makes you feel safe. Well, the first thing that popped up in my head was honestly just being in my own home, you know, just being with my family, being with the people who obviously I've grown up with. And whenever I'm in my house, I feel like, you know, kind of like the world is outside. And at least when I'm in my own house, I can deal with everything with my family. So yeah, that's the biggest thing that makes me feel safe.
Thank you for sharing.
I agree. The first thing that came to mind, because I was trying not to like overthink it, was family. And I guess just like being around them rather than being alone. And then home, especially because of COVID, I've spent so much time at home. Now when I leave the house, I feel like weird, like something is gonna happen, or I don't know. And then something also that came to mind was knowledge for some reason, like knowing certain things that makes me feel secure and safe. And like the more I know, I feel like the more I can handle things and the more safe I feel.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
What makes me feel safe is knowing that when I go outside, I won't be judged by my skin color, because I'm an Asian American and I've been hearing about these attacks on Asian Americans, but I live in a community with mostly Chinese Asians, other Asians. So when I wake up, I feel safer knowing that I won't be judged because of my race, or that I won't get randomly attacked, or my family or friends won't get randomly attacked because I'm Asian.
Yeah, I think for me, I think like I agree with a lot of what the previous people said, like family and being at home. You know, there's like that sense of safety, but also I think ignorance is something that I've kind of thought about, and there's that saying like ignorance is bliss, um, and I think what Helena said, that um, knowledge can make you feel secure. I agree with that as well, but I feel like the ignorance of um, not knowing like all of these terrible things that are happening, and just thinking that, you know, the world is a great place and nothing bad's going to ever happen to you. That also comes with a sense of security, I guess. Yeah, so those were my thoughts.
Thank you. There's a couple of points made in the chat that says prisons and policing maintains the boundaries of social class. I think the current prison system is ineffective and focuses too much on punishment. So what is abolition? So abolition is the dismantling of anything that police, imprisons, or surveils us. So this includes everything that's a part of the prison industrial complex, but it's also speaking to the ways in which these carceral ideologies have infiltrated our institutions, our culture, our relationship with ourselves, with each other, and the earth. So it includes a reimagining of public safety. And I want to be clear about the reimagining piece. It's not looking to an alternative to a prison. That's not the reimagining piece. Abolition requires a shift in everything in order to create this public safety, which Ruthie Wilson Gilmore always kind of brings this up for us. It also encourages us to reimagine the way in which, you know, like I said, we engage with the world and each other. It really hones in on our response, you know, asking us to shift the ways in which we respond to harm. It encourages us to engage in generative conflict, so learning how to navigate and be in conflict, because in order to truly live in an interdependent sort of way, in a way in which we show up and care for each other, conflict is inevitable. And so we have to then engage in a very generative way. And then it asks us to practice care-based accountability versus punishment-based accountability, which is something that was kind of brought up in the chat. So abolition deals with the root causes of things, right? As opposed to the prison system, which perpetuates harm. And so I think that's the gist of what it is. On the top of the slide, I name some of our North Stars: Miriam Kaba, Ruth Wilson Gilmore, Angela Davis, Adrienne Marie Brown, Patrice Cullors, Alexis Pauline Gumbs, Prentice Hemphill, Mia Mingus. They have shaped my framework, and I'm so grateful for them. And so I want to just kind of walk us through some of the stuff. So what does this look like in policy? So abolitionist policy doesn't build anything we have to dismantle in the future. It doesn't leave anyone behind. It rejects the binaries of deserving and undeserving. It doesn't expand the budget's power or reach of the prison industrial complex, including the police. It doesn't legitimize police or any other law enforcement entity. Example, it does not perpetuate the notion that we can make a gentler police force. And this is pulled directly from a post by Justice LA, which is an amazing organization here in Los Angeles. I also wanted to share this chart by Critical Resistance. They have many charts. The one I'm going to share with you is specifically about policing. They have a very similar one in regards to prisons, but it's teaching us about the difference in how to kind of go about determining what is a reformist reform versus a non-reformist reform, or we can call it an abolitionist reform. So some questions we ask to make these decisions are: does this reduce funding to police? Does it challenge the notion that police increase safety? Does it reduce tools, tactics, technology police have at their disposal? Does it reduce the scale of policing? Things that don't do these things are body cameras, community policing, more training, civilian review / oversight boards, jail killer cops prosecute police who have killed and abused civilians. And some things that do these things that would be considered a non-reformist reform or an abolitionist reform is things such as suspend the use of paid administrative leave for cops under investigation, withhold pensions, and don't rehire cops involved in excessive force, require cops to be liable for misconduct settlements, and there's some more down here, like reduce the size of the police force, prioritize spending on community health, education, and affordable housing. So you can also find this chart if you want to read in detail via critical resistance. You can just type in critical resistance reforms versus abolitionist steps to policing. So our next step here is, how do these carceral ideologies play out? How have they infiltrated our culture? How are they playing out within us? So a big thing we noted was the punishment-based accountability versus care-based accountability. Lots of behaviors of shame and revenge. This includes with ourselves, with each other. This includes the way in which we were disciplined as children. All of those, so many different aspects. The way classrooms are ran, the policies that kind of shape our classrooms and such. I wanted to get a little bit at cancel culture, but I think it's a really nuanced conversation because there's so many layers and power structures that go into it. But the piece that I wanted to highlight is this idea of disposability of people, that it feels very carceral. The thing that I want to just note is that people being removed from places of power that have caused harm is not saying that they're disposable. It is, you are harmful here and you need to take a step back and figure out what you need to do in order to get some help, right? And like I said, there's a lot of power dynamics that come into play and identity politics that come into play in this, but I wanted to name that piece of disposability, that if someone does something wrong, they're disposable. That feels very carceral. So I wanted to share this video with you all.
So when I'm trying to explain transformative justice to people, I usually back away from, I don't go straight at, okay, this is transformative justice. I usually actually go back to punitive justice. I start out with like, what we're used to and what we've been socialized into is punitive justice. And then I ask people, if I'm in a room full of people, even in a room full of friends, I'll be like, how many of you grew up in an experience where you were punished when harm happened? And I give examples. You were expelled, you were put in detention, you're suspension, you're put on timeout. But the main move was you're removed from community in some way because you've done harm. And people are like, oh yeah, everyone either has that experience or they were part of spaces where they saw that experience. And then I'm like, we grow that up so that then you go into prison or you get the death penalty or you get canceled from your community, right? It's the same process. So we live in this, that's what we're swimming in. And then I talk about restorative justice as a steps in the right direction, right? It's like harm has happened. How do we restore ourselves back to that relationship that existed before the harm happened? So I'm like, someone stole your purse, you get an apology, they do some community service. Hopefully we return to like where we were. But for me, I always say that doesn't go far enough, because if the original conditions were unjust, then returning to those original conditions is not actually justice, right? You're just going to have someone who's like, great, now I returned everything to you. I still don't have anything and I'm still hungry and I still need something. I'm like, so we need to go further. So to me, transformative justice, the first aspect of it is that it goes all the way down to the root system of the harm and says, how do we change, heal, transform, pull this up? What do we need to do at the root system so that this harm is no longer possible? Like what we're trying to do is stop this harm from ever being possible again. And then how do we understand that the state is so committed to punitive justice, so the state is not going to be able to engage in transformative justice with us, so we don't go to the state to do this kind of deep work. And then how do we turn towards each other to hold this space? And in that turning to each other, we have to say, I believe you can transform.
The bare bones way I describe transformative justice to just anybody that I meet randomly is that it's a way of responding to violence and harm without creating more violence and harm. That's bare bones. What would it look like to respond to harm in a way that doesn't create more trauma, more pain, more harm? And then after that, I would also say the way that I talk about it is that it is a way to respond to violence within our own communities, which feels really important. So it's not this kind of missionary thing, in a way that doesn't rely on violence in state and oppressive systems. So things like police, prisons, the criminal legal system, the court system, ICE, the foster care system. And it also doesn't rely on normalized violence and systemic violence, like reinforcing harmful gender norms or vigilantism, but that it also, most importantly, helps to create and cultivate the very things that we know help to prevent violence. So things like resilience, safety, healing, connection, all of those things.
The way that I usually describe transformative justice is addressing harm, but also understanding why that harm happened and addressing the underlying dynamics that created conditions for this harm to happen in the first place. Mm-hmm. And so it's not just addressing the harm between two or more people, but addressing the conditions of the community that allowed for that to be normal.
Transformative justice asks us not only about accountability for the individual, for the harm that's been caused, but to think more largely about how all of us may have contributed or are contributing or part of these systems that create the harm that we're trying to address.
It distributes the culpability a little bit, which isn't to say, again, that it's even, but everyone holds some amount. Everyone holds some amount. What environment enabled the silencing to go on such that this pattern was able to continue until a crisis? What allowed things to escalate? What were the subtle hints around male supremacy and sexism and white supremacy or different forms of class power that gave people hidden messages that this was acceptable, or that we're not going to intervene, or that it's not of a scale yet that we're going to intervene and say something now to cut it out or to transform, waiting till things get to a point of crisis.
I think that any case that's presented to us, it's very, very likely that other people in that community are experiencing similar things, maybe not to that degree, or maybe not with that language. And it's actually by addressing what's happening between those people that you can understand the underlying dynamics and create tools and practices to address those for other people as well. And I think our interpretation of transformative justice also includes like most community organizing. I feel like most things that folks are doing to shift the underlying dynamics of violence in our society are making more resilient and accountable communities as well, are making it so that people are less likely to be harmful. And so we have a very open interpretation of what transformative justice is.
So instead of zooming in on this harm, this transgression, which is what the criminal legal system looks at, and then coming up with a punishment for it, it zooms out and is like, what's all the context? What's the environment in which this was allowed to happen? And how does that inform what needs to be explored as we work on healing and as we work to transform not just the person who holds the disproportionate amount of responsibility for causing harm or inflicting harm or exacerbating patterns of harm, but ideally, on the other side of a transformative justice process, we've explored enough things that the environment has shifted.
I mean, to me, it means that we actively think about every response that we have as an opportunity to break generational cycles of harm and violence, that we actually think beyond just individual incidences and understand both the micro and the macro, both the individual and the collective. How do we operate in a more long-term understanding of violence, a more generational understanding of violence, so that, that we move past just the immediacy of a feeling of revenge, or that we need to get back at somebody, for example, or a feeling of hopelessness, to actually say, this is an opportunity that I can respond to this. I can either respond to it with more violence and harm, right, and escalate it, or I can take this opportunity to figure out, how do I de-escalate this? And what would that look like?
For me, transformative justice is a practice that I feel like is a life practice. Like, how do I, because harm is happening everywhere, from really little to really egregious. And so if we're really thinking about this, how can we really think about prevention? How can we really think about building relationships where we really encourage each other to take accountability for small things, not only the large? And I think that's preventative to larger, more egregious harms.
handling the small things and addressing them well can actually help to prevent the big things. And so I get really excited around like the nerdy things of like going back to the basics and starting with like, how do we build basic communication skills? How do we build the skill set to be able to give a good apology? What does it look like to be able to, you know, have generative conflict with the people in our everyday lives? How do we talk about accountability and help and support each other to heal with the people in our everyday lives? Those things make me excited. How do we teach our children about consent and accountability? How do we show up for the youth and the children in our lives? And I know it seems less connected to transformative justice, because when we talk about TJ, everyone goes to like automatically like, the most horrific forms of violence and the big forms of violence. But, you know, I think that so much of our work is doing, you know, building the foundation that we need for transformative justice. And if we all just rush always to the crisis, we miss the more sustainable everyday things that to me actually are, when they ripple out, are a bigger force that can change things.
Transformative justice is just the things we do to support each other to survive in this world, from the small things to the big things, like what we do for the people in our communities to help us survive violence. And I think of it as, so transformative justice as both about how we prevent violence, how we intervene in violence, and then how we support each other in the aftermath of violence through healing or accountability or both. And it's all of those things.
I really think about the generations of people who have always been doing this, even though they didn't call it transformative justice. And I just want to lift up all the work of immigrants, queer people of color, disabled folks, sex workers, the people who have never been able to rely on folks outside of their communities.
What I want people to hear when they hear TJ is that this is a set of practices that happens outside of the state. So this is not something that you can take into schools. I want people to take the values into schools, or I want people to take the values into broader institutional work. And those values are around ending prisons and around transforming our understanding of accountability and disconnecting the idea of punishment and justice. But I want people to know that TJ has to happen outside the state. It is not something that we can just turn into another systemic response.
So here are our second set of reflection questions. How do you practice accountability in your personal relationships? How are those values reflected or not reflected in our criminal justice system? We can also call it criminal legal system or criminal punishment system. How were you disciplined as a child? How has that shaped the ways you practice accountability? What is your relationship to conflict? Do you feel you can navigate conflict in a generative way? Yeah, these are questions that you're gonna have to sit with at home. I'm still sitting with them. We're all still sitting with them. But yeah, let's take some time to reflect and share out anything that, you know, comes to mind first. Take a few minutes to do that. Would anyone like to share anything?
Yeah, I really liked what was said in the video about how, like, in our system, we find punishment literally everywhere, like from school, being expelled or suspended, or even just having to leave the classroom, like being sent outside the classroom if you did something wrong. And also, so like connecting that to kind of like things that I learned growing up, and kind of I realized that now, because of like how I was kind of treated when I was doing something wrong, I realized that has carried over into like how I view the way people should be punished now. Like for my little sister, for example, like if she does something wrong, I feel like she has to get what I got, which is like, you know, like I feel like it's more like, it's not, and I don't think that's fair, honestly, because I don't even think it's fair what I got. But I don't know. This is again, I still have to do more thinking about this, but it's making me think about kind of things that I've internalized as the right way because it's just seen everywhere, or it's done everywhere. And now I'm like, in terms of accountability, I try to like check my ego at the door and be like, no, like this is my bad. Like I want to learn from you, and I don't want to think that I'm right. But then as soon as something does go wrong, that like it's so hard. Like my ego's like, no, I want to be right. It's like, you know what I mean? It's hard.
It is. It's hard work. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, just kind of going back to all that. I grew up with a really big family, and I was the youngest. So definitely the way I was disciplined was a lot different than my older siblings. But since I was always surrounded with, so many people, when I was younger, I would say we didn't necessarily handle conflict in the best of ways. So when I started to grow up, I would reflect that into my other types of, friendships, relationships. And it wasn't until obviously like high school or, obviously still now where I'm like, oh yeah, that's not the best, like, that's not the best way to handle it. But now obviously since I'm a lot more aware of how, my actions or, other people's actions can affect all of that, then I really try to be as accountable as I can for my own actions and other people's actions. And since I'm a lot more, I would say out there compared to how I was when I was little, it's a lot easier for me to say something rather than just sit back and, let it happen and just kind of, if something bad is happening, then now I can actually speak out against it instead of just continuing it and all that. But yeah, so.
Thank you for that. Yeah. So someone said, I try and hold people accountable to what they say due to being disciplined when I would not follow through with what I said I would do, which resulted in me watching what people are doing in their actions and trying to hold them accountable if they do something wrong. Yeah, that comment is interesting. I have some opinions in regards to like, do we actually hold people accountable, or do we create, spaces for them to hold themselves accountable? But I feel like that might be a whole another conversation. But yeah, dive into this and take these questions home and reflect and just kind of observe how these sort of things are coming up in our everyday lives. I want to talk about the role of art. So as Dr. Afari said in the beginning, I always think of my artwork as cultural work. I always say we have to shift culture alongside policy in order to create sustainable change, right? It's this very full thing. We are addicted to punishment to some extent. Like we need to figure out how to do these things, like you heard in the video, on our own, not on the state level. Art creates a space to imagine, a space to educate, a space to engage in dialogue. It creates a space for storytelling and self-reflection and a bunch of other things. So the first piece I'm going to talk to you about is Gel Bed Drop. So the Gel Bed Drop experience consists of a performance and interactive installation rooted in challenging our inherent notion between quote unquote crime. And I put that in quotes because everything that's considered a crime isn't harmful. Everything that's harmful isn't criminalized. So our inherent notion between harm and punishment. The work contextualizes and facilitates a space to explore interpersonal accountability and reflect those values back on our quote unquote criminal justice system. This work is an extension of the Gel Bed Drop art series created by Patrice Cullors and Cecilia Sweet Cole through Justice LA. And I believe that Patrice has a book coming out. I think it's called 12 Steps. I don't remember the rest of the title, but if you don't know who Patrice is, look her up and get into this new book. It's about abolition as well. So here's the Jail Bed Drop website. The event starts off with a performance. I'm going to go to the gallery. Each gallery tab has its own page, but I'm going to go to the gallery overview so I can just talk and you all can kind of just see these pictures being flipped through. But if you want to go on the website and look at each sort of gallery, and they all have videos and stuff attached to it, you can do that. There's also a virtual gallery if you want to check it out. That's much more expansive. But this has been an iterative sort of project. So the first Jail Bed Drop, like I said, this started with Justice LA. It was in September of 2017. 100 jail beds were put in front of the Board of Supervisors office protesting a $3.5 billion jail plan. The second iteration, which you see on this first sort of carousel, was in December of 2017. About 50 different artists were given a jail bed and placed in a different city within Los Angeles County, and we activated the spaces at the same time. It was the day before Christmas. And so this was a sort of movement meditation that I shared with a collaborator. His name is Julian Granberry. What you don't see in the photos are two sort of slabs of wood that we pulled off of the bed. That way we could get inside, but we posted them on the side and wrote information throughout this sort of experience. We were like next to a grocery store. We were writing information about the jail plan and also some facts in regards to the prison system, and basically, you know, letting people know this is not, you know, effective in building another jail. We should not be investing our tax dollars into this. And so for my senior project at USC is where I wanted to create a larger version and expand upon it. And so I put out an artist call, and I knew I wanted to work with architecture students and create some sort of interactive installation. But so the first part is a performance, and this is where this sort of iteration of the performance and interactive installation sort of expands. The performance element starts with myself and Bindu Swaminathan. Bindu is doing spoken word, I'm doing movement, and we're sitting in these different ideas as it relates to things we find important to our own healing processes, and also things that we find are reoccurring in the prison system. So things like human touch and agency and accountability and militarization. We're grappling with a lot of these different ideas via our different mediums of art. And so I'm actually going to show a video of that. Also during this, there is a ceremony that happens where we have collected items from system impacted folks. And by system impacted folks, I mean people who are formerly incarcerated, currently incarcerated, and the loved ones of both formerly and currently incarcerated folks. So we've collected items from them and we placed them in the room throughout this performance. And so I'm going to show you a clip that meshes together. The performance is like 20 minutes. This clip is only 1 minute. But it'll give you a sort of short idea of what the performance was like.
From the perception of the multisensory human, the intention behind an action determines its effects.
There are more than 300,000 prisoners in California alone.
Every intention affects both us and others.
A situation that bordered on faction.
And the effects of intentions extend far beyond the physical world.
Okay, so that kind of gives you a quick overview of what the performance is like. And I'll give you some context in regards to the installation. Let me see if I can expand the screen. So we have this room that is the same size as a jail cell in California. And the jail bed is inside of this room, and we're placing the items in the room. It kind of becomes an altar space, but once it's time for the sort of interaction with the audience, because after the performance, the audience can interact with these structures. It kind of plays with this juxtaposition of what a room is to most people or should be, right? The space of rest, dreaming, safety. What happens to that when it becomes a prison or a jail cell? And so they're grappling with all of these different things as they walk into the space. The dome, we came to this idea of the dome thinking of this idea of play that I always talk about, this idea of play and imagination as it comes to this work as a form of research and sort of exploration of developing new strategies, but also thinking of the impact of children in this conversation. And so, but once put in the context of the performance, the dome becomes emblematic of how sort of interconnected the prison industrial complex is with just about every other system or part of our lives, which you saw and heard in these videos. This headpiece is heavy, but it is emblematic of sort of the shame and the stigma that's attached to formerly incarcerated people and how it impacts their ability to receive housing and a job, and just this sort of shame that comes along with it, or how we're shaming formerly incarcerated people. It also it speaks to just our attachment to the PIC, whether it's internalized or sort of through institutions or systemically, the ways in which we are connected to this. And so how folks are interacting, so inside of the room, you can go in, pick up these items, look at them. There's a book that has the significance of each item in the room that people can read these stories from system impacted people. On the outside walls of the room, one side is a timeline of the prison system in the United States. The other side is a call to action. For a long time, I think for a year, it was Measure R. And this information about the measure, a QR code to sign up to volunteer or take you directly to the website to learn more information. Then on the backside walls of the room, there's some questions that are really overt as it relates to the ideologies of the prison system. Some that I presented to you today, like what makes someone deserving of imprisonment. There's 5 questions, people can write their response, hang them on the wall. Then inside of the dome, people can climb inside and sit down and have conversations with anyone who shows up in the dome with them. And these are more personal questions, like, is human touch important to you? If so, why? What would you like to see in your community? What makes you feel you have a sense of dignity? Questions around, personal practices of accountability. They're all really personal. And so something that I like about this project and really wanted to make sure that it held was these different access points to the conversation so people can see how full this work is, and the through line between our personal praxis and our political praxis, and all of these other nuances in between that happen on a cultural level. The very last one we did was a full gallery. We ended up having to turn it virtual because of COVID, but it was supposed to be an open event, and you can go on the Jail Bed Drop website, which is just www.jailbeddrop.com, and look at the virtual gallery. There's a nice soundscape that goes along with it on the left corner if you want to check it out. But this is pretty much the gist of this work. You can, like I said, you can look at each event deeper at the sort of their individual page tabs. So our next piece of work is Letters from the Etui. Letters from the Etui is a digital platform featuring an animated video series, text, and accompanying accompanying a series of workshops that support abolitionist frameworks from personal to political practice. And a tui, from the old French word estui, meaning prison, is a small ornamental case used for holding needles, cosmetics, and often other sacred possessions like personal letters. The project blends these meanings, offering the etui as a metaphor for holding the sacredness and value of the people, ideas, creativity, and relationships impacted by imprisonment, and rejecting the sense of disposability that prisons support in our culture at large. Here, letters serve to connect students to each other across the walls of the prison system. They connect resistance struggles around the world, and they connect us as citizens and activists to a world oriented towards abolition. There's a letter from us on the page. Dr. Afari's animated video series collaboration he did with his students at Lancaster State Prison and at Cal State LA. Frida Afari's letters from political prisoners in Iran, translated from Persian to English. And what I want to note about letter writing as it relates to folks that are incarcerated is that it really gives us this sort of full scope. So we see, these personal sort of interactions of letter writing as an exchange of memories, dreams, hopes, or just updates with family and friends. And then we also see letter writing being used as a tool for advocacy, to expose the system, to advocate for oneself or each other. And so we can really see on a personal and systemic level what's going on. And so I really like this framework of having letters be an entry point. So we had a number of workshops. In each session, I wanted folks to be grounded in theory, or have some sort of lecture that really helped develop this framework or kind of lay down history. The first one, we did do an overview of some of the props and measures that were on the upcoming ballot. And then the second part, I wanted folks to hear directly from system impacted folks, whether that be through art or through a conversation. And then the last thing, I wanted folks to reflect internally, how have they embodied these things? So we took more so a somatic approach to folks diving in personally and thinking about what they can do in their personal lives and how they can go about healing. And so that's what each series did. I attach a call to action to all of my work. So you will see a resource page, both on Letters from the Etui page and the Gel That Drop page, where you can get information from podcasts to books to articles to people to follow on Instagram. Lots of different things, places to donate, orgs to follow, people to follow. We had some amazing merch for Letters from the Etui. We, Minhan Vu did this I Voted sticker series that says, we imagine, we organize, we resist, we rest, we play, we heal. We also had an envelope series. And so when I was in this process of like, how can I, what kind of merch can we create to, get some money to send back to folks inside? I was thinking of, what was relevant, and this whole vote by mail fiasco was happening. And so I got to this idea of envelopes. And so I hit up Han, who is both on, Minhan Vu and Georgina Grekikian are both on the team for Letters from Etui and Gel That Drop. They created the structures, and they built this website as well. I brought this idea to her in terms of envelopes, and I asked Han, I was like, hey, do you want to, she's an amazing visual artist. Did she want to do some sort of sketches on envelopes? And she was like, what if we reach out to one of our, artists that we've worked with for Gel That Drop? So the first person I thought of was Christian Branscombe. When I called him and told him the idea, he told me that he actually used to draw on his envelopes when he was in prison. And he said that once it was stamped with the prison stamp, and it was considered prison art. So when he would send it out to folks, they would sell the envelopes and send the money back inside to him. But once the prison learned that he was making money from drawing on his envelopes, they banned him from being able to draw on his envelope. So we did exactly what he did. We had him do some drawings. Han designed them into envelopes, an envelope series, and then we sold them and gave the proceeds to folks inside or formerly incarcerated. Check out the resource page on the Joe Bedrop website. You can contact me via email, or you can follow along with, upcoming projects via me on Instagram. But I just want to take this time and open the floor up to any questions folks might have.
I really liked how you opened up talking about your experience with dance and how it relates to it, and the magic space, and how like you can use that actually for activism. And like I'm an actor, and we also have that sort of like improv magic space where you just like go, it's like subconscious, and you're just able to like that's like where the magic happens. You can't even really describe it. It's kind of abstract, but it's like in the movie Soul, I don't know if they like go into the zone, the zone, and that, using that as like, like healing and like caring for yourself and your body. I actually didn't really look at it that way, because I look at the art form as like, or recently I've been looking at it more as like work, and like, but that made me realize that you can use it as like healing, and it is really good for your soul and for your mental health. So yeah, I appreciated how you talked about that. And actually, I mean, could you give a few little more tips about like self-care that you were kind of talking about in the beginning?
Yeah. For me, it feels really personal. I can share what works for me. And I think also having check-ins, because what you need to do might change based off of many different things. But for me, I definitely have to like have some sort of movement practice for my body every day. Like I feel like I need to sweat before I can sit down and like get on my computer and do work. I have to go outside for walks. Like I need the sun. Like I'm very clear about that. I have to schedule in times to take breaks and times to eat, because sometimes I can forget to do that. What I'm also learning, like if I feel like I don't have enough time to cook for myself, then maybe I'm doing something wrong. Like this idea of rest is so important. And it relates back to, capitalism and our, kind of addiction to productivity.
Yes.
So like prioritizing that, knowing when to say yes and when to say no, feels really important. Also knowing when to let go. I think in terms of a lot of the work that I do, I mean, this can also be applied personally, but when I'm working on a project, I have to know that, I can only do so much. And I have to have discernment when I'm working with people. And I said I had to learn when to let go.
Yes.
Thing that I can practice personally, but also a lot of times in the work that I do, I have to have discernment when choosing who I'm working with, but also trusting their brilliance. So I have a vision or an idea, and I have to understand that and not be married to what I think it is, but lean into that space of the unknowing and trusting the work that I'm doing and the discernment that I have. And then the thing can be what it's supposed to be, as opposed to me being married to what I think it should be. And that is normally, like I said, leaning into that space of the unknowing allows me to do that. Because if I was married to my ideas of everything, even in terms of like my life, anything, then it wouldn't be what it's supposed to be. And so that is something that I have to constantly practice, that and keeps me well, and not needing to lean on certainty, right? I'm a freelance artist. Like if I chose to lean on certainty, I would be stressed all the time.
I know.
So yeah, I think that is what I would say.
That was really helpful. Yeah, that literally happened to me last night where I was like collaborating with a friend who's a director and we were like creating a story, and I was like he would give me these ideas, and for some reason I was like so resistant to them, and I wanted it to have it my way and like have my ideas. But honestly, like the art form is about like surrendering to the art unknown and finding the like magic space, and what's supposed to happen for it will happen. And yeah, I just definitely need to remind myself about that more. That was really helpful. Thank you.
Of course. And a lot of times it's greater than what you could even ever have envisioned.
That's such a great question and such a wonderful response. Just thank you so much for sharing this, this inspiring modeling of your work and the way both your artwork and your various projects, but also this philosophical ideas that motivate you and really make you do the kind of work that you do. I'm really glad also that in this class in particular, we're having you speak after the students just did their own performances last week, which was to actually take someone else's words and then create a performance based on that. So a little bit of letting go of your own work and handing it to someone else, and then being able to kind of enact the embodied experience of someone else to play that role as well too. So it was just perfect timing, I think, for us to really appreciate the kind of work that you're doing, and the way in which you're helping advance the abolitionist movement, helping bring out the values and ideas, and really helping us transform our own notions of what criminal justice means, or what social justice could actually mean as well too. So really appreciate your being here today. I'm so glad, talking about leaning into the unknown, like when we met 3 months ago, several months ago, and getting into this project of letters on the ETWI, I had no idea. And just seeing you now and seeing how that project developed, and hearing some of your work as well too, is, for me, it's like so inspiring and so wonderful to see. Thank you. Really
Thank
appreciate
you. Thank you all for listening and sitting in questions with me. I appreciate y'all, and stay connected. I have to run to another meeting, but have a good day. And thank you, Dr. Afari, for having me.